Don't you dare leave me here, I screamed, running after the car, my heart slamming against my ribs. Dad just laughed. Figure it out yourself, kid. Mom didn't even glance up. Call it a lesson in independence. Their tires screeched, dust filled my lungs, and as the car disappeared down the highway, the truth hit me like a gut punch. They weren't coming back. Before we dive into the full story of how I survived, rebuilt my life, and faced them again years later, do me a favor. Subscribe to the channel, hit that like button, and drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from. Trust me, you'll want to stick around to the very end of this one. My parents, Gerald and Denise, used to remind me daily that having me ruined their plans. They'd wanted to travel, party, and stay carefree. Instead, they got a mortgage they couldn't pay, jobs they hated, and a son they never really bonded with. If you ask me, they were already spiraling financially before I even came along, but blaming me was easier than owning their own mistakes. Money was always tight in our house. Mom's credit card debt ballooned from her shopping sprees. Dad gambled away whatever we had left. They argued constantly about not having enough cash to enjoy life. When I was little, they'd hide it behind forced smiles, but as I got older, it became obvious they resented me. It got so bad they'd pull stunts they called life lessons, but everyone else would call it pure cruelty. Oddly enough, the only person in my family who ever really cared was my godfather, Uncle Wayne. He wasn't related to me by blood, but Dad had chosen him as my godfather back when I was born. Wayne was the opposite of my parents. He'd visit when he could, bring me small gifts at Christmas, even leave supportive notes in my backpack. He tried to talk sense into my parents about how they treated me, but they blew him off, saying he was spoiling me. Despite the tension, Wayne stuck around, and he always told me, "If you're in serious trouble, call me." That summer day, we were coming back from visiting my older sister Sabrina at her college. It was a 4-hour drive to get home. Dad was angry from losing money on scratch-off tickets the night before, and Mom was mad because I was in the back seat ignoring them. She called me ungrateful at least 5 times in an hour. Then we pulled into this beat-up gas station for a fill-up. The sign outside flickered, half-burnt bulbs spelling GSSDT on. While Dad pumped gas, he barked at me, "Get inside and buy me a black coffee and hurry up." Mom just sat scrolling through her phone. That's how it always was. I went in, waited forever because the coffee machine was acting up, and came out holding 2 styrofoam cups, one for Dad, one for me. But the car was gone. No note, no final glare from the window. Just a text on my phone that read, "We'll see how long it takes you to get home. Mom." A winking emoji followed, as if this was some hilarious prank. It took a minute to sink in. At first, I thought maybe they were parked around the corner. Then I realized they'd really left. My heart started racing. I tried calling, straight to voicemail. Another text arrived. "Don't call again. Figure it out yourself." My knees literally felt weak. This wasn't some quick punishment. They wanted me gone. All my stuff, my backpack, clothes, Idaho, everything was in that car, except my wallet, which I happened to have in my pocket. I had maybe $40 to my name. In that moment, I remembered all the times they'd teased I was too expensive, or how Dad said, "We'd be living the high life if we didn't have a kid." I realized this lesson was really them ditching me so they could finally live the carefree life they'd always wanted. The heat from the asphalt was unbearable, but nothing compared to the heat in my chest. Anger, hurt, betrayal, all swirling like a tornado in my stomach. That's when I remembered Wayne. I still had my phone. He'd said, "Call me if you're ever in a bad spot." This definitely counted, so I stepped into the grimy station restroom and dialed his number. "Kid, where are you?" he asked, sounding shocked I even called. I told him everything through tears. He didn't say much, just told me to text him my location and stay put. He was 5 hours away, but he promised he'd come. The relief washed over me so hard I almost cried again. The gas station cashier let me stay indoors while I waited, probably noticing how shell-shocked I looked. He even gave me a free soda. I remember sipping it in slow motion, telling myself, I can't go back to them, not after this. Wayne showed up late that evening in his old pickup. He was furious, but he tried to hide it for my sake. He just said, "Get in, kid," and drove me to a small motel a few miles away. He paid for a room, then we sat on the edge of the bed with the TV muted, eating stale pretzels from a vending machine. He told me how he suspected my parents might pull something drastic, but he never thought they'd abandon me at a gas station. The next morning, Wayne had to head back to his own job, but he didn't leave me there alone. Instead, he got me a bus ticket to his hometown. "Stay at my place. I'll figure out the paperwork for your school," he said. Then he lowered his voice. "I've been wanting to get you away from them for a long time, but I had to wait until it was your choice." And that was the moment I knew I'd never return to my parents' house. They'd made their bed, now they could lie in it without me. After a couple of days, I started hearing rumors through my sister Sabrina. Turns out, my parents' finances were worse than I even realized. They were behind on house payments, credit cards maxed out, and Dad owed money to who knows how many bookies. Mom apparently wanted to file for bankruptcy. They probably saw me as just one more expense, food, clothes, everything a teenager needs, and decided cutting me off was their best bet. What I didn't expect was how they lied to everyone else, telling them I ran away and left them heartbroken. They played the worried parents act all over town. Meanwhile, I was sleeping on Wayne's couch, trying to figure out how to enroll in a new high school without any of my documents. Wayne kept things calm, though. He was the adult I'd never really had in my own home. See, Wayne wasn't just giving me a place to crash, he wanted to protect me legally. My parents had a history of forging documents to dodge bills or claim extra benefits. Wayne suspected they might try something similar with me, maybe claim I was missing, or that I was a delinquent to get out of child support if they were ever held responsible. One weekend, Wayne and I drove back to the outskirts of my hometown when we knew my parents would be gone. We visited an old family friend who had a stash of my birth records and medical forms from when I was a baby. We even found some of my grandparents' old documents that showed a small inheritance was supposed to go to me when I turned 18. My parents apparently tried to reroute it into their own accounts. It felt like we'd found a gold mine of evidence, proof that I wasn't the runaway they claimed. Wayne told me we could use these documents if my parents tried to drag me back or ruin my name. We'll fight fire with fire, he said. They won't get away with this. The next year was tough. I was a new kid at a high school where nobody knew me. I barely slept at first, too stressed about what my parents might do. But slowly, I found my groove. I discovered I had a knack for fixing things: bikes, leaky pipes, old radios. Wayne helped me turn it into a small side hustle around the neighborhood. Meanwhile, my sister Sabrina would call occasionally, usually in tears, saying Mom and Dad were furious at me for abandoning them. She tried to feed me their sob stories about how they were struggling. She even said Dad was blaming me for his debts, as if I made him gamble. But I was done with that guilt. They hadn't just driven away from a gas station. They'd driven away from their responsibility as parents. The only real family I had was Wayne, and maybe Sabrina, if she ever learned to stand up for herself. I saved every penny I earned, planning for the day I'd turn 18 and be fully independent. A couple years passed, and I was about to graduate. That's when my parents suddenly tried to find me. Dad's gambling was out of control, and they were about to lose the house. So they showed up at Wayne's doorstep one afternoon like it was the most natural thing in the world. I'd just come home from a part-time shift at a hardware store. There they were on the porch, banging on the door, demanding I step outside. I froze in place. I opened the door, and Mom rushed forward, tears in her eyes. "Where have you been?" she sobbed. "We've been so worried." Her words dripped with a desperation that felt fake. Dad tried to look stern, but I could see fear behind his eyes. "You owe us," he said bluntly. "We spent money raising you, and now you're living here doing well for yourself. We can't pay the mortgage, and it's time you step up." I almost laughed in disbelief. "You left me at a gas station. Doesn't that mean you gave up any claim on me?" Mom insisted it was a misunderstanding, that they'd come back for me, just a little too late. Wayne stood by my side, arms crossed, glaring at them. They demanded money. I said no. Wayne pulled out a folder with those documents we found, birth records, notes from my grandparents, even evidence they'd forged my signature on a form to try stealing a small inheritance. Dad's face went white. He realized he couldn't bully me anymore. I wasn't that scared 16-year-old kid with no options. Dad started shouting that Wayne was interfering in family business. Mom complained about how she was forced to shop at discount stores now, how life was unfair. Meanwhile, I just watched them unravel. It was surreal seeing these two people who'd once had complete control over my life begging me for help. I guess karma was paying them a visit. Finally, Wayne had enough and told them to leave or he'd call the police. My parents refused at first, Dad pushing Wayne's shoulder like he wanted a fight. But Wayne didn't flinch. He reminded them we had evidence of their fraud, and we weren't afraid to use it. I never saw Dad back down from a fight so fast. They stormed off, calling us traitors, but the look in their eyes wasn't just anger, it was fear. Right after that showdown, I turned 18. My parents tried one last move, calling the police claiming I was a runaway. But the cops took one look at the documents showing they'd abandoned me, plus Wayne's sworn statement, and basically told my parents to get lost. That was the day I felt truly free. I got my high school diploma, and Wayne threw a small graduation party. A few of his friends came by, all of them cheering me on, telling me how far I'd come. For the first time in my life, I felt like I had a real support system. I stayed in Wayne's town, working construction jobs during the day and taking classes at the local community college at night. Eventually, I saved enough to rent my own place. Those documents Wayne and I had dug up, they stayed in a safe deposit box, just in case. I never knew if my parents would try more legal shenanigans to squeeze money out of me, but for a while, they vanished. No phone calls, no letters, no drama. Wayne was getting older, and I worried about him. We'd become more than just godfather and godson. He was basically my dad. He'd taught me how to drive, balance a checkbook, and pick out the right tools for a job. When I started my own small repair service, he was my first investor. I never had to face the nightmares of my parents alone because Wayne was there. Sadly, Wayne passed away a few years later from heart complications. I was devastated, but he left me with something valuable, a sense of self-worth. He also left behind a few personal items, including an old journal where he'd kept track of every little interference he'd done to help me, paying for my bus ticket, sneaking me food, calling out my parents when they were being cruel. Reading those entries made me realize how much he cared, and it gave me the strength to keep moving forward. Fast forward about 2 decades from the day they left me at that gas station. I'd built a decent construction and home renovation business. Then, one afternoon, I got a call from my sister Sabrina. I hadn't spoken to her in years, and the moment I heard her voice, I knew something was wrong. "Mom and Dad found you," she said. "They know you're successful, and they're in trouble. They want money again," I sighed. Part of me wanted to ignore it all, but Sabrina told me they were desperate. They'd lost their house. "They keep saying you owe them," Sabrina whispered. "I tried to stop them, but they won't listen. They plan to show up at your office." I thanked her for the warning. Deep down, I wasn't the scared kid they'd left behind. They had no leverage over me this time, except the emotional scars they'd caused long ago. Sure enough, a week later, my receptionist buzzed me. "Gerald and Denise are here to see you," she said quietly. "They're causing a scene in the lobby." I checked the security camera and saw my parents in shabby clothes, Dad's hair gone gray, Mom's face lined with worry and anger. I told security to let them in, but to keep an eye on things. They walked into my office, scanning the place like they couldn't believe it was mine. "Look at you," Mom said. "We always knew you'd make it. We're proud." I held up a hand. "Stop. I know you're here because you're in trouble. Let's not pretend it's anything else." Dad cleared his throat. "We don't have a place to live. You have the means to help, so we expect you to." He said it like we were discussing me loaning them a tool, not a massive sum of money. I stared at him, still not believing how brazen he was. "You abandoned me at a gas station. You stole an inheritance meant for me. You lied to everyone, claiming I ran away on drugs. Now you want me to bail you out?" Mom's tears dried up real fast. "We were just trying to make you stronger, and who cares about a little inheritance? We're your parents. We gave you life." My chest felt tight, but I kept my cool. "Well, guess what? I don't owe you anything." I pulled out the folder containing those old documents Wayne and I had found. Forged signatures, letters from them threatening to leave me penniless, proof of their lies. Dad started yelling about how this was ancient history. Mom hissed that I was cruel. "You have a choice. Walk out of here or I hand these papers over to the authorities and you deal with fraud charges." In the end, he just looked at the floor, muttered something about me being heartless, and dragged Mom out of the office. I watched them leave. No tears, no regrets. After 20 years, I finally got closure. They had no hold on me, no sway over my emotions, and certainly no claim to my wallet. Everything ended the moment they walked out of my office for good.